is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Okay. Good evening, everyone, and thank you for joining us. Before we get started, I'd like to share a little bit of information about Starbridge. And for those of you who aren't familiar with us, our mission is below, but it is to partner with people and their families who have disabilities around education, employment, health, and community living. If you have more questions about Starbridge, please visit our website at www.starbridgeinc.org. And a little bit more information about us is that we touch the lives of more than 10,000 people within the Finger Lakes region. As you can see below, there's many different aspects of things that we support, such as special education, advocacy, family reimbursement, and workshops and webinars like we're doing tonight. If you have questions or concerns, please feel free to call us at the numbers below, and we can help you. So my name is Laura Arrington, and I'm the Family and Youth Education Coordinator here at Starbridge. Before we get started, just a few quick housekeeping notes as anyone's new to webinars. We're going to talk to you about how to use the questions pane. I will talk to you, there will be a follow-up email with a SurveyMonkey link. I'm going to ask if everybody please take a moment. It doesn't have to be tonight, but if you could do it tomorrow, that would be wonderful. This gives us feedback on how we're doing, and it also is information that we share with our funders so we can provide webinars like this to you for free. So as you can see at the top of your screen, if that box is in your way, you can click that orange button and it will collapse that panel and it will be out of your way so you can see the entire slideshow. If you're having problems joining us and you cannot hear or you're unable to hear the information, you can click on telephone. It will actually give you a number, or click on the mic if you're using a headset, or if you're just having it come through and you're having issues. Also, I want to point out down here is the questions pane. Very important, because as we go through, Jennifer will be asking a few questions and you can type your answers in and I will be reading them back. But feel free to ask questions. We will save them to the end, but I will ask them in the order in which we received them. And again, questions panes also. So this is also the important part, handouts. If you see them, they should be right in that file. You should be able to click on them and print them out. If you have any problems with that, please feel free to type in the questions pane, and I would be more than happy to send those to you as well. So before we get started, we always like to see who is joining us. And let me just bring that up for you. And we have a polling question. So I'm going to launch that poll. And what we're asking is, are you a parent, family member, individual with a disability, education professional, human service provider, or other? So I see that they're coming in already. And it looks about 50% have voted. And I'll just give everyone another moment. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and close that poll. I'm going to share the results so you can see those. So it looks like 80% are parent or family members and 20% are human service providers. So thank you so much. Let me hide that. And we have one more. And let me share that one with you. So we're looking at the age of a family member or who you support with a disability. So we're looking, is it 0 to 3, 4 to 7, 8 to 12, 13 to 18, or 18 years of age or older? So I'll give you just another moment. And I know when you're a human service provider, it's probably hard to narrow it down. So I would say just use your best judgment on the children or students that you work with. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and close that poll. And let me share the results with you. So it looks like 40% are 0 to 3, 60 are 4 to 7, 40% are 8 to 12, and right now we don't have anyone joining us for 13 to 18-year-olds or beyond that. So thank you so much. Let me hide that poll. And in just a moment, I'm going to have Jen go ahead and introduce herself, and then I will hand the presentation over to Jennifer, and then she will start the presentation. So Jen, I'm just going to send that over to you. And when you receive it.
Are we good? Can we see my screen?
We can see your screen. Thank you so much. Go ahead.
Excellent. Well, welcome everybody. Thank you for joining us today to talk about challenging behavior, particularly in young children. Thank you, Laura, for introducing me. I do have to apologize that for my voice, I at least have a voice today, whereas I didn't yesterday. So I usually don't sound so like raspy, but hopefully everybody can hear me okay. Like Laura mentioned, so my name is Jen Rymanowski. I am a regional behavior specialist with the RSE task. The RSE task stands for the Regional Special Education Technical Assistance and Support Center. We are a network that is contracted through New York State Department of Education, and we work in partnership with many networks under SED, including Special Education Quality Assurance, which is stands for CEQA. Parent Center is another one, and as well as other networks. Our our mission is to support initiatives that provide, we support schools as well as families, particular students, in providing technical assistance as well as professional development to help to improve instructional practices and therefore improve outcomes specifically for students with disabilities. So we serve children from birth through 21, and all of our specialists that you can see here on the screen serve those populations under many different capacities. So I am one of the behavior specialists, and my main focus is really though in more of that early childhood, preschool age, so those younger kids. So for part one of our webinar series, we're going to explore the many factors that may influence the presence of behavior, including exploring challenging behavior and the difference from what is really challenging behavior versus what is typical behavior. So in part two then, which will occur in a couple weeks, part two will help to identify strategies for behavior prevention, strategies for promoting positive behaviors, as well as strategies for responding to challenging behaviors. So first I want to begin the webinar series by asking folks, and this is a place where you can answer in the chat box, and Laura will moderate, our webinar today, and kind of give us feedback on. The first question that I have is for folks of, what do you believe is challenging behavior? How would you define challenging behavior?
And if you just want to take a moment and type something in the chat box, feel free. So one of the questions is throwing a tantrum.
Okay, throwing a tantrum might be considered challenging behavior. Yeah?
Oh, this is a good one. Behavior that I cannot discover the root cause of.
Oh, so it's challenging because it's present, it's potentially disruptive to what the task is at hand, and we can't quite figure it out.
Someone else shared all great ones. Challenging behaviors as a student who is unable to be distracted.
Oh, so that kind of hypervigilant,
Maybe
focus,
perseverating. Yeah.
Yeah, yes, the perseveration. Exactly. Yeah.
Another
Well,
one.
and so,
Oh, sorry.
oh,
I
go
have
ahead.
two. Oh, I have several more. Behavior that is.
How good. I'm glad everybody's very involved.
This is very good. Behavior that is undesirable in a certain situation. Being
In a certain situation.
dysregulated.
That's excellent.
A student who does not seem to be able to control their
Do we have
bodies.
others?
Yep. And the other one is students who do not seem to be able to control their bodies.
Okay, well, and actually, I think that that last response particularly, all the responses were fantastic and exactly where I wanted us to start to explore when we start talking about challenging behavior. The last one in particularly, honing in on the phrase certain situations, I think is key, because when we think about challenging behavior, there may be times when that behavior actually could be appropriate. You could think about that. So say the behavior of a child refusing to do something, right? Saying no, asserting themselves in that way. At that moment, when it's an adult directed task and it is, for the betterment of education, let's say, or even it's bedtime and we need to get our child to bed, they need sleep, and they're refusing and throwing that tantrum or saying no. When you think about, take a step back and think about when might that behavior actually be appropriate. Really what that child is doing is they're asserting themselves. And in other situations and other contexts, maybe asserting yourself and saying no is actually fully appropriate and something that you'd want. So the reason why I want to start the webinar this way is really exploring what is challenging behavior, because there may be times when that behavior that we often think about as challenging is not really challenging at all. So we might even reframe that phrase challenging behavior to reframe to the phrase of unwanted behavior given the context, unwanted behavior given the task at hand. Whereas in other situations, that behavior may actually be wanted. So with that in mind, for us, in order to better grasp behavior, we need to come from the place of understanding that some behaviors may be considered typical or developmentally appropriate, where others may be considered unwanted at that time, like I said. Ultimately, in order to understand how to prevent and respond to those unwanted behaviors, we have to first understand the factors that influence behavior. So for one factor that can influence behavior are those biological factors. So specifically when we're talking about brain development. So brain development significantly influences a child's behavior. So our brains are not considered fully developed until around the age 25 years old. So therefore, for a young child whose brain is still developing, there may be a number of skills that are lacking, and the absence of those skills will influence those behaviors. When we think about that a brain is not developed until 25, are we also placing appropriate expectations for that child? Not saying that children should not have expectations, because they absolutely should, and we should always, push to strive, push them to just be a little bit better and just kind of take that, take just a little bit of a step more. But we also do have to consider, when we're thinking about behavior, is might this behavior actually just be typical for that child when you think about what's going on in their brains. So when our children are tiny babies in the womb, their brains begin to grow. And that growth really occurs from the bottom of their brain up. So when they're born, their skills also begin to develop from that kind of bottom-up fashion. So we're going to look at the processes of the brain from the perspective of a psychiatrist by the name of Dan Siegel. He's a child psychiatrist who specializes in neurobiology. This first area of the brain down here, he identifies as the instinctive brain. So the instinctive brain is one that controls our automatic functions, controls arousal, hunger, digestion, breathing, essentially aspects of ourselves that is involuntary. The next area of the brain is the emotional brain, or as Dan Siegel also calls this, the downstairs brain. So our emotional brain has two key areas: the amygdala, which is our fear filter. It is highly reactive, responds to environmental stimuli and the things that happen in our environment very quickly. It makes those very snap judgments. The amygdala, the little purple, bubble right there at the end is the amygdala, is attached to that backwards C, and that's that area is called the hippocampus. And so the hippocampus is responsible for storing our memory. So the emotional brain's job is to quickly process occurrences in the environment, and when the amygdala senses danger, it will trigger the body to react through a fight, flight, or freeze response. Now, finally, the last area of the brain to develop, so remember when we said our brains aren't fully developed until we're about 25 years old, this last area of the brain really is the last area that really truly becomes fully developed. And this area is we'll call it the thinking brain. So the thinking brain is responsible for our executive function skills. So those skills such as organizing, planning, attention, the social and emotional skills that we want kids to learn. It really is housed in the thinking brain. The thinking brain also is the part of the brain that assesses for consequences and helps to make decisions on behavior. So Dan Siegel likens our brains to a house with a set of stairs between the downstairs brain, so between our emotional brain, and the upstairs brain, which is our thinking brain. And those stairs have a baby gate attached. When the thinking brain has been taught the skills to gain control over the emotional brain, that baby gate remains open to the upstairs brain. So in a perfect world, the emotional brain then will send signals that there's potentially a danger out in the environment, and the emotional brain and the thinking brain will essentially then compare notes with each other and decide how to react. So that's that thinking before acting. So remember when we were talking about, though, our brains are not fully developed until really our early 20s. So therefore, we know that young children have very highly developed emotional brains, but yet their thinking brain is still under construction. So therefore, it's most common for that downstairs brain, that thinking brain, to essentially slam that baby gate closed, take full control when facing a perceived threat from the environment, does not engage in those executive functioning processes, those social emotional skills, those coping skills, that self-regulation, because that emotional brain doesn't work in that way. All of those skills are housed in the thinking brain. For kids, those perceived threats could be, to us, as simple as a change in a schedule, or a change in routine, or a direction to complete a difficult task, or not getting something that they want. Those types of things within the environment, it may be developmentally typical for kids to be highly reactive to things such as that. So what we know is then what happens when there's a threat, the child may engage then in those behaviors to fight, like hitting, kicking, yelling no. They may engage in behaviors that cause them to freeze or shut down, or they may flee, they may run away, for example. So it's incredibly important for us to know that when we are looking at behavior and looking at unwanted behavior and and our child starts spiraling into, that quote crisis, knowing where they're operating from. They're not operating from that thinking brain. That baby gate is slammed. Those executive functioning skills are not present at all, and they are solely working from that emotional brain, that fight, flight, or freeze response. So that's one factor. So when we think about brain development, and to kind of piggyback off of that brain development discussion, you should also consider where a child is, or where your child is within the developmental continuum, to identify if their behavior is potentially developmentally appropriate. So ultimately, we want you to think, are my expectations developmentally appropriate? Is this behavior developmentally appropriate? And depending on your answers, you may take different approaches when responding to that unwanted behavior. So we have to first know, or have even an understanding of well, what is developmentally appropriate given a child's developmental age. So we're going to engage in an activity now, where I'm going to show you a behavior, and I want you to answer in your chat box. I want you to answer, at what age do you think a child should be able to do that skill? Age 3, age 4, or age 5? And when I say age, it's we're really talking from developmental age, not necessarily chronological age, but I guess for the sake of this activity, kind of think of a typical 3-year-old, a typical 4-year-old, or a typical 5-year-old. Okay. Laura, you think we're ready?
Okay, we're ready.
Okay, great. So, developing a favorite friend. Answer, do you think that this is a typical skill for a 3-year-old, a 4-year-old, or a 5-year-old?
We have a 5. We have a
Okay.
4. Another 5.
Okay. And I'll say that, so this is on average a 4-year-old skill.
And another 5. Thanks.
And another 5, all right. How about begin to understand dangerous situations, like a hot stove or cars driving on the street?
I'm just going to give them a second to come in, and then I'll read them off to you.
Cool.
Okay, we have a 4 and many 3s.
All right, and this is more of a 3-year-old behavior. Very good. Able to take turns or share.
We have some 4s, several 5s, a 2. Okay. And
this is more
and some
of
3s.
Okay, and this is more of a 4-year-old skill. Able to make choices between 2 things.
And I'm just letting those responses come in, and then I'll respond. We have several 2s, several 3s, and a 4.
All right. Making choices is really more around a 3-year-old skill. So when you think about this, is something that we do a lot, right? It may be very difficult for a 2-year-old to do this, right? The skill tends to be more highly developed at 3 years old. Having an attention span of 5 to 10 minutes.
Okay, and we're just going to have those responses come in. You guys are pros at using your chat boxes, so thank you. We have a couple of 4s, but mostly 5s.
And this is a 4-year-old skill. Oh. So then the next one, this should be fairly easy then. Attention span of 3 to 5 minutes.
We're just having those responses come in. It looks like it's almost all 3s.
And yep, everybody's spot on. That's about a 3-year-old skill. Right? Understand the idea of turn taking. They don't always do it, but they understand the idea of it.
Okay, and responses are starting to come in. We have a couple of 3s, several 4s, and a 5.
Okay, and that's about a 3-year-old skill. Attention span of 10 to 15 minutes. Oh, never mind. I took that one out.
Well, someone said 6, so I like it.
You can begin a task when assigned with no reminding or prompting.
Okay, a few more responses are coming in. Almost all 5s, two or so 4s.
Okay, and this according to developmental milestone checklists anyway, this is more of a 4-year-old skill. Okay, so we have transitions from one activity to another at the request of an adult.
This one is all 4s.
And our milestones say it's about a 3-year-old skill.
Oh, actually, I'm going to say there is one person who did a 3. So thank you.
You do have a person who did a 3.
Yeah.
Right. Returns objects or materials to the assigned place, or, for example, cleanup.
This one's a little more different. We have a couple of 2s, we have a couple of 3s, we have a 5, and we have a 4.
Okay. This, on average, is about a 4-year-old skill. Comforts playmates in distress.
This is pretty much tied between 3s and 4s.
Okay, and we've got a 4. Remains quiet while others are talking.
Fours and 5s.
4s and 5s, and I've got a 5. Sits in the seat and stands in line without moving.
5s, and we have a few sprinkled 6s.
Ah, and I have that. This is actually a skill that 4-year-olds can do. And so the finally I have talks about their own feelings.
5s and a few 4s that we're having.
And I have 5. So as we go through these, and I'm not expecting everybody to just know this. I don't know this off the top of my head. I'm looking on a sheet right now, going over these. This is just to bring awareness to. We need to, if we're going to set expectations for our kids, or if we see behavior that's occurring, we want to go back and consult. Is it developmentally appropriate behavior? Even if it is developmentally appropriate behavior, that doesn't mean that our children cannot learn. So we can still work with them in helping to teach them additional skills or teach them to respond in different ways. But we should approach behavior from a perspective of that it's not necessarily fully abnormal. It could be typical, and it's just then our teaching moment, for our child. So we're going to next go just a little bit deeper in talking specifically about typical behavior for 3, 4, 5, and 6-year-olds. And remember again, though, when I say ages, I'm really talking about those developmental ages, not chronological ages. So you may have a child that with a chronological age of 10, but a developmental age of 3. It's also important to note that there are milestone checklists that you can access that are all online. If you want to look further into where is my child, kind of where does my child fall when it comes to developmental milestones, the Center for Disease Control website has some. I recommend those milestones because they're very, very parent friendly, especially for parents to be able to kind of quickly survey. All right. Oh, okay. So let's first start talking about our emotional 3-year-olds, and maybe speaking from my own experience as a mother, but when they say terrible twos have nothing on 3-year-olds, I absolutely believe it. 3-year-olds are ruled by emotion. They're ruled by emotion, but yet they do not have those executive functioning skills of planning and problem solving to help them navigate those emotions. So remembering back to when we talked about the brain, these 3-year-olds are living, they live every day in the emotional brain. So you may see many tantrum behaviors, like one of our participants mentioned that's challenging behavior for them, is tantrums. You will very likely see that with 3-year-olds. Their behaviors can very easily escalate, especially based also on our responses to their behavior. 3-year-olds are impulsive, so expecting them to wait for something they want is really a tall task. And if they feel something, they will act on it. At 3, kids are exploring the behaviors that make up friendship, but they often need a lot of assistance to navigate that social world. Remember, they don't have that thinking brain developed, not even close. Then when our emotional 3-year-olds move into 4s, they begin to build that capacity for reasoning and problem solving. 4-year-olds start, at 4 years old, it starts the beginning of understanding cause and effect. 4-year-olds start to understand that they can make decisions and impact the world around them. And therefore, you often see 4-year-old children behave in ways that are bossy and defiant, because they're asserting themselves, they're experimenting with that. We see patterns among 4-year-olds where they may be quick to anger when met with frustrating tasks. And remember, even though they're building those thinking brain skills, their emotional brains still are more developed than their thinking brain. So in crisis, their emotional brain will take control, even at 4. When kids are the developmental age of 4, we begin to see them gaining more skills within the realm of friendships. In order to navigate friendships, they have to problem solve. 4-year-olds tend to share more, begin to develop empathy, and we start seeing cooperative play with peers. And of course, these are the beginning stages of these skills, though. So we will see them make mistakes, and we are going to need to be present to help teach them those skills, or further teach them, the development, or through the development of those skills. And then finally, we have our 5s and 6-year-olds. So by 5 and 6 years old, we see children with better emotional regulation, more ability to verbally express their feelings and control their impulses. These children may use words to express anger versus getting physical or throwing a tantrum, unlike our 3-year-olds. However, this does not mean they will do this all the time, and it also does not mean they will not use mean words. 5s and 6-year-olds tend to be more concerned with morality and right versus wrong. They can be very black and white thinkers. Overall, 5s and 6-year-olds begin to explore independence and will test boundaries, but they're still eager to please adults. So in typical development, they enjoy their friendships, and they also continue to develop empathy. Please understand that when children move through development, this is not a smooth road. It's actually very bumpy. So you may see highly developed skills in one area, but yet underdeveloped skills in other areas. And as soon as your child has a birthday, it does not mean he or she will move on to the next stage. So therefore, in order to best understand typical behavior, you have to understand, you still have to explore the skills and needs of your individual child, because it's, unfortunately, it would be a lot easier if there was a kind of the set prescription, but these are just kind of general, in general, what we see is typical for these developmental ages. All right, so another factor that influences the presence of unwanted or wanted behaviors are our own interactions with children. So essentially the environment and what we bring within the environment can influence behavior. So the experience a child has profoundly affects a child's development, as well as affects their behavior. So I'm going to have you guys all watch a video. And as you watch this video, I want you to listen for key points about how you, as a significant person in a child's life, can help to build and shape the architecture of a young child's brain. So I want you to look for key things that stand out to you during this video, or with respect to how you can influence a child's brain.
Science tells us that the experiences we have in the first years of our lives actually affect the physical architecture of the developing brain. This means that brains aren't just born, they're also built over time based on our experiences. Just as a house needs a sturdy foundation to support the walls and roof, a brain needs a good base to support all future development. Positive interactions between young children and their caregivers literally build the architecture of the developing brain. Building a sturdy foundation in the earliest years provides a good base for a lifetime of good mental function and better overall health. So just how is the solid brain foundation built and maintained in a developing child? One way is through what brain experts call serve and return interactions. Imagine a tennis match between a caregiver and a child, but instead of hitting a ball back and forth across the net, various forms of communication pass between the two. From eye contact to touch, from singing to simple games like peekaboo. These interactions, repeated throughout a young person's developing years, are the bricks that build a healthy foundation for all future development. But another kind of childhood experience shapes brain development too, and that's stress. Good kinds of stress, like meeting new people or studying for a test, are healthy for development because they prepare kids to cope with future challenges. Another kind of stress, called toxic stress, is bad for brain development. If a child is exposed to serious ongoing hardships like abuse and neglect, and he has no other caregiver in his life to provide support, the basic structures of his developing brain may be damaged. Without a sturdy foundation to properly support future development, he is at risk for a lifetime of health problems, development issues, even addiction. It's possible to fix some of the damage of toxic stress later on, but it's easier, more effective, and less expensive to build solid brain architecture in the first place. One of the things that sturdy brain architecture supports is the development of basic emotional and social skills, an important group of skills which scientists call executive function and self-regulation can be thought of like air traffic control in the child's mental airspace. Think of a young child's brain as the control tower at a busy airport. All those planes landing and taking off and all of the support systems on the ground simultaneously demand the controller's attention to avoid a crash. It's the same with a young child learning to pay attention, plan ahead and remember, and follow lots of rules. Like all of us, kids have to react to things happening in the world around them, while also dealing with worries, temptations, and obligations on their minds. As these demands for attention pile up, air traffic control helps a child regulate the flow of information, prioritize tasks, above all, find ways to manage stress and avoid mental collisions along the way. Having this ability is a necessity for positive and level mental health. Developing effective air traffic control, overcoming toxic stress, and building solid brain architecture are things kids can't do on their own. And since strong societies are made up of healthy, contributing individuals, it's up to us as a community to make sure all young people have the kinds of nurturing experiences they need for a positive development. To build better futures, we need to build better brains.
Okay. All right, so my question then is, using your chat box, tell me, what did you hear in this video? What stood out to you?
So there's actually several who say great video, and actually someone wants to know what is the name of that video.
So let me go back. I'm not gonna replay it. I'll just show the website. The AlbertaFamilyWellness.org. Can everybody see that? Is it on your screen, Laura?
It's on my screen. I can see it.
So that video came from the Alberta Family Wellness Initiative. This video also is oftentimes used in by researchers out of Harvard. So the Center for the Developing Child at Harvard University has done a lot of work around kind of the neurological processes and how children's experience can significantly affect literally the physical development of brains. So do we have any other questions on kind of the video itself, or where that was from? Are we good?
Oops, I'm sorry, I had myself on mute. Positive early caregiver interactions.
Yes. So something that stood out to you was the importance of positive early caregiver or early child caregiver interactions. What are some other things that stood out?
This is a good one. Toxic stress impacts on the developing brain.
Yeah. And when we're talking about toxic stress, that stress can come from many different places. It's, not necessarily just stress from a caregiver. It can be, there's a number of different stressors that kids can face. That stress is not necessarily a bad thing. There can be stress that, like you said, even just school is stressful. That it's another set of challenges. Kids are facing demands that require them to push their limits past skills and start learning skills that they don't have, and that itself can be stressful. That's positive stress, but yet there is another layer of stress, that toxic stress, that when you think of particular kids with trauma past, that can change or shape the development of a brain and can lead to behavior challenges. Anything else that stood out for folks?
There's also healthy stress.
Yes, there is.
Just interesting how the brain develops.
Yes.
Bad stress versus good stress, and exposures to many experiences.
Absolutely. And, ultimately, I think, and from what I'm hearing from all the responses, I think that you guys, are seeing that the experiences that we provide to kids can have profound effects, for children and for their development, and then ultimately, ultimately have effects on their behavior. What the video ultimately is telling us is that we are the ones that can make that difference. And when we interact with a child, we physically change the makeup of that child's brain. Our interactions and the experiences we provide children cause the neurons within the brain to fire, and then those neurons grow connections with other neurons, which are like our brain's wiring, like the brain's electrical system. Those connections are the foundations for developing those social and emotional skills, such as problem solving and the ability to cope and empathy. Those skills that we need kids to have, those executive function skills, so then they can, when facing a stressor, their emotional brain isn't necessarily the ones that take full control, but their thinking brain has the capability of strong, of being highly developed and helping to regulate some of that emotional response. There we go. So we know based on the video that stress can have an impact on child's development and therefore have an effect on behavior. When stressed, we don't see things as they are, we see things as we are. So a child's emotions cloud rational judgment. Also, children take on environmental stress, which includes our own stress. So with stress, we're more likely to see children engaging in unwanted behaviors, which then in turn is stressful for us. So then it's that vicious cycle of their behaviors causes stress for us. They then take on our stress, which then links to then continuing or exacerbation of their behavior. We also know that chronic or that toxic stress, like the type of stress related to traumatic experiences, affects those neural connections between the thinking brain and the emotional brain. So that pathway between the thinking brain and the emotional brain is especially important for the development of emotional regulation and social skills. So this is one reason why when a child has experienced chronic toxic stress, you may see that child misinterpreting situations. You may see more emotional outbursts. That child tends to have more difficulty coping. And one key way to reduce stress in children is to actively work to build trusting and supportive relationships with kids. Relationships are the foundation for everything that we do and crucial to reducing challenging behavior. Relationships with children ultimately supply the context for how kids learn to communicate and how they learn to develop relationships with others. It is the context for self-esteem and learning empathy and learning what respect looks like. So, with all of that, when we're talking about the factors that influence behavior, we are also another factor, and the relationship that we have with kids and the experiences that we provide to kids also can be a major influencer on when it comes to behavior. So given those factors that we discussed, that behavior is influenced by our biology, it's influenced by where kids are on the developmental continuum, and it's influenced by the environment and influenced by us. We believe that there are 4 guiding principles to behavior. So for one, behavior serves a purpose. So there is a reason why a child engages in that behavior. And in this picture, there's a reason why this little boy threw himself on the ground and he's crying, right? So second, the context around the behavior matters. So our behaviors are interactive with the environment such that what occurs before and after that behavior influences that behavior. So for this boy, you may see he's in some kind of store, with a woman, perhaps mom. Is this behavior more likely to occur in stores? Is it more likely to occur with mom? What happened right before? What happened right after? All of those questions, the context around that behavior matters. Okay. Third, behavior is predictable. So behavior tends to happen in patterns. So for example, we know that when mom is in store with her son, he will ask for candy. And if she says no, he will throw himself on the ground and cry. And when this happens, she will try to get him up from the ground. Sometimes, if he cries hard enough or if he refuses to move, she'll give him the candy, because at this point people are staring and she just needs to finish her shopping because she needs to meet her other son who's getting off the bus, right? And we can see time and time again, every time she goes in the store with her son, that these patterns are present, and it's predictable. And then finally, behavior is learned. So if we understand the context and we see that pattern of behavior and how the behavior is reinforced over time, we can see then how that behavior has been learned. So what this means, though, is that if unwanted behaviors can be learned, then wanted behaviors can also be learned. So knowing this gives us the power to change aspects of the environment to prevent and decrease the occurrence of those unwanted behaviors, but then teach more acceptable wanted behaviors in their place. So what if we change our mindsets a little around behavior and we saw behavior as our child's best attempt to cope with a situation, given their own thoughts, given their feelings, given their past experiences? The reason that behavior is present is because it has worked in the past. When the child has engaged in that behavior in the past, the environment's response to that behavior has given him or her something. It has given him or her something. And remember, our reactions and responses to that behavior are also part of the environment. A child's behavior, this next bullet, is a form of, it ultimately serves the same purpose as other forms of communication. So I need something, I do this, and by doing that, I get what I need. Even children that have the verbal ability to vocalize their wants and needs will still engage in behavior because that behavior, that behavior has worked for them, and it may be even more effective at getting their wants and needs met than actually using those vocalizations and those verbalizations in order to get their needs met. So ultimately that behavior has taken place of their vocal communication, but it's still, that behavior itself is a form of communication. It gets them what they need. So this does not, though, mean that all behavior is premeditated or meant to be deliberate or intentional. It's just ultimately a tool that kids have learned that helps them to get their needs met in the best way that they know how. So now that we have more understanding around the influences of behavior, we can start to dive into a little bit deeper thinking around what to do about it. And our next part 2 of this webinar really goes a little bit further into that, but these next couple of slides are kind of our precursor to that to our part 2. So now that we have more understanding around behavior, let's look at the behavior pathway. So in order to know how to prevent or change unwanted behavior, we have to be able to evaluate the context around behavior. So remember that behavior interacts with the environment. So the environment influences whether the behavior happens or not. We have the power to change that context. And when we do, we can then change that behavior. So we often refer to this context as the ABCs of behavior. So this chain of events is important to know if you're looking to prevent unwanted behavior or decrease the occurrence, of unwanted behavior. It allows you to look for patterns when you can look at behavior in kind of this way. The first event here within this chain is the setting event. So this is a situation or event that tends to set the stage for behavior. So it's like dynamite. If the dynamite's present, there is a much greater chance for a match that's lit, so a trigger, a spark. It's much more likely for an explosion to happen if dynamite is present. So for example, this may be, an example might be, an argument after school leads to a much greater chance that when your child is asked to eat dinner, he's going to refuse. So that argument is kind of our setting event. So the next event in our chain is the antecedent. The antecedent is an event that occurs right before the unwanted behavior, or it triggers or it sets off the behavior like a match. And then the behavior itself is the explosion. And then finally, the consequence is the event that follows the behavior. So consequence here does not mean punishment. Consequence is purely the environmental response to that behavior. So in our previous example, after the child refuses to eat dinner, the consequence may be that you continue to tell him to eat, possibly plead with him, possibly yell at him, possibly send him away without having eaten at all. Right? All of those things are just our response to the behavior. We might perceive it as I'm punishing him because I'm yelling at him, but it's really just a consequence is just what did you do after that behavior? So when we inspect this entire chain of events, we can then hypothesize the function of the behavior. So when we say function, the function means the reason why the behavior occurred. So we can make a guess then as to why this behavior has occurred. What are they trying to communicate to me? What was their payoff? So ultimately, what did the child, quote, get by engaging in that behavior? Is that function? So research tells us there are just two functions of behavior. So just two reasons why behavior occurs, and that is either to gain something or to avoid something. So for example, a child may gain attention from peers or adults, may gain tangible objects, may gain access to activities, may gain feelings or sensations, that sensory stimulation. Or he or she may avoid an unpleasant activity or avoid having to follow through on a direction, or avoid social interaction, avoid an object, avoid an activity, avoid a sensation. So when we think about function, it moves our conversation from what the behavior actually is. You know, our behavior is a tantrum, and tantrum looks like X, Y, and Z. And it moves that conversation from that, of what the form of the behavior is, to the function of the behavior, or why the behavior is actually happening. So in our scenario, when the child refuses to eat dinner, and the parent continues to tell them to eat, she pleads with them to eat, yells at them, finally sends them away without leaving. In looking at our functions, I want you to think about that scenario, use the chat box and tell us, what did the child get?
Okay, I'll open up your chat boxes. We also have several questions coming in as well, but I'll wait until the presentation ends.
Okay.
Child could go away with not eating.
Yep.
And someone just asked if you could just repeat what you were asking of them again.
Okay. In thinking about that scenario, so the consequences being, so the child refuses to eat dinner, right? And the parent's response to that, so the parent's consequence to that is to tell him to eat, to plead with him to eat, to yell at him about eating. He still won't eat, finally sends him away without eating. So hearing that was how the parent responded. Looking at the slide, at the functions of behavior, how the parent responded, what function does that match up with? What might we speculate is the reason why that behavior was present? What happened in that scenario? What did the child get?
Okay, so maybe, Jennifer, you could maybe provide some hints.
Sure. So when the parent continues to tell the child to eat, is the child gaining something, or is the child escaping something when the parent stands there and tells them, you have to eat, please eat, I'm begging you to eat? Are they gaining something, or are they avoiding something?
So
From the parent?
That was perfect. So several people are saying either they gain the attention from the parent, or they're escaping or avoiding what they didn't want to eat.
Right. So they do. So when you think about that entire chain and you think about how did the parent respond, the parent initially responded with a whole lot of attention, right? Pleading, begging for the child to eat. Child still won't do it. Ultimately, an additional response then that the parent gave does align with escaping or avoiding, because then ultimately the parent sends the child away without eating. So that's exactly right. So when we look at that entire, and I'm going to go back, when we look at the entire chain of events, all of these things here, it's really just almost like taking a step back and replaying all of the events that occurred like a movie. All right, what occurred first? What occurred next? What would the behavior look like? How did I respond? And then when we look at that entire movie, we can take that step back and say, okay, ultimately, what did the child get from my response? Or what did the child escape or avoid given my response, right? And so that leads us to then think about, or be able to think about, okay, what was the function of their behavior? And if we know that, then we can critically evaluate our role in sustaining that child's behavior. Okay. And we can, once we can evaluate our role, then we can start to come up with strategies on how to prevent and respond to that unwanted behavior. So all of these discussions that we just had today is really kind of our lead-in to that part 2, where we talk about strategies, because we can't talk about strategies until we really understand why behavior has occurred. All right? Because if you don't evaluate the why, then applying strategies is really going to be like throwing darts at a dartboard. And you have all of these tools in your tool chest. You want to make sure that you are applying the appropriate ones given the appropriate situation. You don't want to use a hammer when you need to be using a wrench, right? So you need to understand why around behavior prior to being able to implement, or to engage in a strategy. So on part 2 is really where we're going to start talking about that. That's on February 28th. I want to thank you all for joining me, and I know that Laura said that there's a number of questions, and we're at 8 o'clock, but if you can stick around for questions, I would love to be able to answer some for you.
Great, thank you. So we had some questions coming in, but feel free to also continue to ask questions as we go. The first question that came in was someone saying on their child's IEP, at the age of 3, why would they want to put a goal of cooperative play with peers on it?
That's a wonderful question. I see that a lot. Ultimately, we want to make sure that our IEP goals are developmentally appropriate for our kids. With that said, not everybody fully knows or understands what may or may not be developmentally appropriate. So if there's ever a goal, as a parent, if there is ever a goal on the IEP that you don't necessarily agree with, or you feel like there needs to be several precursor goals that are met before we tackle this really lofty goal, for my 3-year-old, such as cooperative play, then that is fully within your right to push back and challenge, some of those goals. With that also being said, though, that when we talk about developmental milestones, it's not, they're not all set in stone. There is variability of children's abilities. That's where we really want to make sure that we're critically evaluating the skills of our individual kids. So maybe that could be possibly an appropriate goal given the other skills that your child has, but maybe it's not. So that's where we want to make sure that we fully understand milestones and developmentally appropriate skills, but also understanding our particular child.
Great.
Does that answer the question?
Great, thank you. So the next one is, in the video it mentioned counteracting toxic stress. How can a caregiver do this? They say that their child is globally delayed and was in foster care for 2 years and has trauma from their biological parents, and they've only lived with them for 7 months.
Okay. So one of the ways that you're combating that is for that child to be with you, and for you, so the child is no longer in that situation that is that stressful situation. So that is one thing. You are already doing something for that child, with that child being with you, being in more of a stable, nurturing environment. Another thing that you want to concentrate on for kids that do have traumatic pasts is making sure that you provide that nurturing and stable relationship. So consistency is key, especially when for those kids you will see more behavior. Understanding that that behavior is not about you; it's about what it's about what happened, for that child. So knowing not to take it personally, and knowing that what best you can do for that child is to build that relationship so they know that they are safe with you. Even if they may not feel safe all the time, they know when they are with you, they're safe with you. Another thing that you can do for that child is fully understand that the behavior that is there is you have the ability to be able to, through those relationships and being able to set boundaries and all of that consistency. And when we talk about, or in part two, we're going to be able to get into some of those strategies, being able to implement those things with consistency and from a loving and nurturing place, that you'll be able to, you will be able to make a difference for that child. They will be able to develop and grow skills. It just may be at a slower pace or look a little different than other children.
Great. Thank you so much, Jennifer. This one is, I'm a teacher of a kindergarten class, and I noticed that when a student has changes at home, their behavior at school changes as well. Is there any way we as teachers can help a child continue to have a normal or a stable time at school, even though maybe their world at home is changing?
It's funny that, so we hear time and time again, especially from teachers, that especially when teachers converse with parents, that the parents will say, well, they never do this at home. And then the teacher is, well, they always do that here. Kids, we can't control everything that occurs at home, just like, unfortunately, and I speak for myself as a parent, I can't always control everything that occurs at school. The best that you can do is making sure that you teach rules, teach expectations, maintain consistency, have a very loving and reinforcing environment at school. Even if you can't make a lot of headway of making changes at home, child will know that school is a place that provides me this and meets my needs, even if home doesn't look the same way. Another, and I'm sure that you already do this, but as much as you can, try to reinforce with the parents of the importance of things such as schedules and routines. As much as you can, educate parents or help to guide parents. They don't necessarily have the knowledge base that you do or that teachers do. Around child development, or there's no manual, unfortunately, for parents when a child is born. So as much as we can support parents by providing them, whether it's materials or just making it simple for them, to try to create consistency between home and school is I think also key.
Thanks. This is actually a follow-up to that question. The same person, they were saying in this particular child's case, the mother is pregnant again, and the student is very upset about the new baby.
Okay. And so the question is that, what can I do for that student at school, given circumstances at home?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Okay. And I think, prior to engaging anything that I may say next, is making sure that there's conversations with family on what is seen at school, and what and what may be the reasons for why, and the welcoming of the new baby may be a factor that is at play. School can very well be an extension from home, and anything that the parents are communicating with the child at home about, you have a new brother or sister coming, and this is how it's going to look, and preparing the child for that. Having conversations with family to have a consistent message, that even repeating a similar message across the day for the child at school could just give the family bigger bang for their buck, potentially, because there's constant opportunity for the child to hear that message, not just at home. You could also focus for that child working on skills such as sharing, such as cooperation, and liken it to, you're, focusing on those social emotional skills of friendship. And when you do X, Y, and Z, when you share with your friend, look how happy they are. You have a brother or sister coming, you get to share with them too, and kind of emphasizing those social emotional skills that the child may demonstrate in class with other peers, but liken it to those skills that they can potentially demonstrate with the new baby that's coming, to help them understand that that these skills that you see or that the child demonstrates in the classroom can transcend outside of the classroom, and they're really just they're skills that you can utilize in the world, no matter where you are, or whom your interactions are within the world. I don't know if that fully answers the question.
They actually said thank you. That was very helpful.
Okay. Okay, great.
And this is a follow-up also to the one where the child is in foster care with the family, and their globally delayed 2-year-old was adopted from foster care. They have court-mandated visits with the biological parents 4 times a year. So afterwards, what they find is severe reactions for about 2 weeks, and they're wondering if any suggestions to help lessen the reaction or make it easier for the child to recover.
Yeah. Well, and I think one step there, what they see is, and I hopefully part 2 will give a little bit more clarity around some of this. But the fact that they see that pattern, they can recognize that pattern, already gives them the power to then to implement some things to change that pattern, right? Sorry, hold on. Excuse me. You can't change the presence of the visit, or control what mom or dad or whomever the visit is with. You can't control their behaviors. What you can do is you can prime the child prior to the visits, as best as a 2-year-old with developmental, with global delays, as much as they understand, which might be fairly difficult, but even priming in the way of making sure that routines and schedules and how typically the environment looks at home remains the same leading up to that visit, especially though after that visit, making sure that responses that we have to behavior is consistent as it was prior to the visit. What our routines look like at home are consistent with what they were prior to the visit, making sure that as much as we can not change a whole lot for that child, so then that child can come back to feeling that safety and security again, is important. It's not going to, I'm not saying that it's not going to be difficult, because it will be difficult, especially with a child that's so young that already does have delays. It's going to take a lot of time, I think, for that child to, especially because the child is newer with their foster family. It is going to take a lot of time for that child to develop a sense of understanding that where they are now is separate from where they were, and ultimately all you can really do is nurture and love that child and maintain that consistency and that responsiveness, of that nurturing caregiver, prior to and after that visit, and knowing and fully knowing and understanding that it's not you, the behavior is not about you. It is really about what happened for that child.
And they say thank you so much. They said, sorry to jump the gun, but they're very glad to be participating in this webinar and
Absolutely.
excited for part 2. It is very helpful. And we have one last comment. Someone sharing that they work with a BCBA, and I'm not sure what that is, so maybe if you do, Jennifer, you could share that, in our school for 2 of their kids, and one is also homeschooled.
Okay.
And I think they're, I don't see a question, so I don't know if they're just sharing that information.
Okay. Well, and I'll say, so I also have my BCBA. So I'm a proponent for BCBAs. It's a BCBA, for folks who don't know, is a board certified behavior analyst. So it's essentially, when you think about your teacher, has their master's degree in education, it's like it's a master's degree in behavior is what a BCBA is. So, everything that I was talking about with the ABCs of behavior and function, that's drawn right out of that ABA, that, from language that a BCBA would use. So I would hope that any information that came out of this training does not conflict at all with information that they take from, what they've heard from their own provider as well.
Great, thank you. So we want to thank everyone for joining us. And as you can see, part 2 is on February 28th. If you're not signed up, please sign up for part 2 for February 28th. And remember that you will have a link to a SurveyMonkey. Please take some time to fill that out. Both Jennifer and I, we share that information with our funders so we can continue to provide these workshops for free. I want to thank Jennifer for the amazing part 1, and we're all excited for part 2. So thank you so much, Jennifer.
Absolutely, and I thank all of you for taking time out of your very busy schedules. And I know this is bedtime, so it's, for folks that have children, that it can be a little hard to pull yourself away. So I really appreciate everybody staying and participating.
Okay, thank you so much, and have a good evening, everyone.
Laura, are you still on?